There we are. Slight technical issue. Sorry about that. So we're going to begin in 10 seconds. Good morning. The May 5th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Estimate will continue to meet virtually. At this time, I would like the comptroller to add any corrections, additions, or noted extensions to today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no changes or corrections to today's agenda. On pages 69 and 70, there is a protest for items number 2 and 3, Department of Public Works, Office of Engineering and Construction, SC 954, primary settling tanks, numbers 3 and 4, rehabilitation at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant. A protest was received from Miles and Stockbridge PC on behalf of American Contracting and Environmental Services, Incorporated. A response to protest was received from Robert Fulton DeShiel, Esquire, on behalf of Ullman Schutte Construction, LLC. A response to protest was received from Tidings and Rosenberg on behalf of Highmark Construction Group, Incorporated. There are no deferrals or withdrawals. The following items are moved to the non-routine agenda. Page 34, Baltimore City Fire Department, ratification of renewal and agreement with the Maryland Stadium Authority. Pages 54 to 64. Item number 5, Bureau of Procurement B50003985, Telecommunication Improvement and Procurement Project. Pages 69 to 70, items 2 and 3, Department of Public Works, Office of Engineering Construction, SC 954, primary settling tanks numbers 3 and 4, rehabilitation at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant. The following item is moved to the routine agenda. Page 79, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. The following extensions have been sent to the board by the Honorable President Nick Mosby on page 25, item number 30, Personnel, Office of the State's Attorney. And on page 73, item number 1, Office of the State's Attorney, Travel Approval Reimbursement.
I now like to direct the board's attention to the memorandum from my office dated May 3rd, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items. Together with any corrections or additions that have been noted by the comptroller, I will entertain a motion to approve the items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All those in favor of approving the items on the routine agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda is now adopted. On to the non-routine agenda items. The first item on non-routine agenda can be found on page 34, Baltimore City Fire Department, ratification of renewal agreement. This renewal of the agreement between the city and the Maryland Stadium Authority provides EMS support at stadium events, specifically Orioles games. Do we have anyone on hand from the fire department to speak on behalf of this item?
That would be me, James Fisher, Baltimore City Fire Department, Chief Financial Officer.
Mr. Fisher, I yield the floor to you.
This contract, and I think Chief Matz from Baltimore City Fire Department is also in attendance. This contract historically has been one with the Maryland Stadium Authority to provide EMS direction and services for EMS for problems during Oriole games. So when there's a major EMS emergency of some sort, so that they can help direct people and equipment to the stadium, the Camden Yards, so that we can get people transported properly. We charge it's an overtime situation for our personnel. We charge for their overtime now, and for equipment, it's normally one medic unit. If the crowd gets larger than, I believe it's 30,000, Maryland Stadium Authority, in conjunction with EMS, they request additional support for a crowd that size. They have their own EMS services within the stadium, but we help provide coordination with outside services with Baltimore City EMS. Chief Metz.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Mayor Scott, City Council President Mosby, Comptroller Henry, and members of the Board of Estimates. My name's James Matz. I'm the Deputy Chief of EMS. One thing I would like to point out, earlier in the week, I was receiving a few questions about the Maryland Stadium Authority agreement. Back at the close of 2017, we used to charge a standard flat rate per unit per game. And it wasn't realistic on our reimbursement costs for expenses for the unit. So in 2018, we took the proactive stance and charged actual overtime expense. And this is just the fruition of that through 18 and 19. Bear in mind, in 2020, we didn't provide service due to the COVID pandemic. So I'm open for any questions if I can answer any for anyone.
Thank you, Chief Matz, as well as Mr. Fisher. At this point, are there any questions from the board? Yes, Comptroller Henry.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. Chief, this agreement allows the city, the fire department specifically, to bill the stadium authority for up to $100,000. Can you give us an idea of what the average per game costs are? If let's start with if it's under 30,000 and you just have one unit there, and then tell us if that's scalable. You know, does that mean every time it's over 30,000, it's twice that or three times that or what?
It's exactly that, Comptroller Henry. Actually, back in 2017, I had the actual, at the end of the year, what we charged the Stadium Authority as a total. In 17, it was 46,800. In 18, they're reporting 36,800, but I think that was a little bit of a ransomware problem we were having with the ransomware. And then in 2019, our total bill was for 58,888. So we're well under the $100,000 cap. I actually had to recheck it again before we went into the new agreement, making sure we're nowhere near that $100,000 cap that they used in the agreement.
So what is that per game cost for one crew?
Honestly, Comptroller, I'll have to do the math. If you give me a second, I'll do the math for you. But average overtime rate in the fire department is like $47 an hour times, how long is the game? So
Normally, they provide an hour before and after the game, so it's normally about 7 hours.
Okay, so most of a shift.
an overtime shift, correct?
Okay, and that unit is there at Camden Yards the whole time, unless it has to actually provide transport to a hospital for a case. But otherwise, it's just there on call.
Correct, to provide advanced life support if needed.
So overtime is 47 an hour per, on average, per crew member, two members to each crew?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's round it up to 50 to give us an easy bit of math to do on camera. And let's say 6 hours at $50 an hour, you're talking about 300 each. So 600. So the reason that I was curious about this is I had a constituent reach out to me a couple months back complaining that they got a bill for $750 when they slipped and broke their ankle, and all that the EMT crew had to do was come pick them up and drive them the 3 blocks to an ER. They didn't provide any medical assistance in terms of any medication or anything other than picking them up, putting them in the back of the ambulance, going, yep, that looks broken, and took them to the ER. And we charged $750 for that service, plus $10 a mile. And so what I'm trying to get a sense of is if we are charging regular, ordinary Baltimoreans when they receive injuries significantly more to actually be taken to a hospital to receive medical attention, why are we charging less than that crew could be out serving the people of Baltimore? And I'm not even going to get into the recent back and forth over whether we are adequately staffed or not when it comes to EMT services. That's going to be a conversation that's going to happen elsewhere. But can you speak a little bit to why we would charge less to keep an overtime crew available for most of a shift than we would charge for having a regular crew do 30 minutes of work?
So there's a couple of situations we have to answer here first. First, we're charging for the actual cost of our personnel to be on location to provide care if needed. Secondly, if we're transporting the patient, and there's more to transporting a patient than you're alluding to, you have to do a complete assessment, you have to splint a fractured ankle. You know, if appropriate, you give pain medications. Apparently, it wasn't appropriate this time. That's the standard billing rate that they use. It's approved through Medicare as well as Medicaid. Just because you bill $750 for a transport, the average which you receive, one, if it's medically necessary to transport, because in the eyes of Medicare or Medicaid, a lot of times that's not medically necessary. They'll say they could have went by other means to the hospital. Thirdly, honestly, we don't clear that kind of money that we bill. Your approved Medicare rate or Medicare rate is much lower than that, sir. I'll defer to Mr. Mayor.
Please, Mr. Matz, before we go on to the mayor, we're gonna get to you, Mr. Mayor. Comptroller, just out of respect for your question, and regarding that last answer, are you satisfied, Mr. Comptroller?
I'm happy to yield and hear what the mayor has to say.
All right, Mr. Mayor, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Mr. Comptroller, I understand your frustration and your line of questioning, but I think that this is something and that the chief is spot on. If they transport someone from the stadium, that's the same kind of result will happen based on that situation, just like with the constituent that you heard from. But I think the chief brought up a good point, something that I actually just happened to talk to some fire members of our fire department yesterday in one of our firehouses that we have to and that we're going to have to deal with, and that is what the chief talked about. Because we know the resources that we have, but we also have to do a better job of communicating out to folks the realities of calling for an ambulance and when they should call for an ambulance to take them to a hospital or when not. Because we are seeing time and time again, if you spend time talking to the women and men in BCFD, they will tell you that folks are costing themselves money by calling 911 when they could have gotten to, the hospital via or wherever they need to go via other means that would be a lot cheaper. Actually, one of the gentlemen said yesterday, because they were close to Sinai, that it'd be cheaper to call an Uber to take you for some small injury than versus calling 911. I think that that's a longer communication thing as we start to talk about how we're diverting things and making sure that the fire department has the assistance they need to be dealing with the emergency things versus stuff that we have to have go to other places that we should have a longer conversation about. But I know for you and for the council president, because we were all on the council at that time, when we were talking about this particular issue and talking about the stadiums not being charged the rate that they should. And what you're hearing from the chief is that we are now at the point where we're actually charging the funds that we should have been charging for a long time for the residents of Baltimore to get their resources to be used in the most appropriate way.
Mr. Comptroller.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with you 100%. I have had conversations with the fire chief about the importance of having that broader conversation, maybe find a way to involve the hospitals and the insurance companies in setting up some type of organized but less expensive medical transport system, specifically so that people can call whatever, Uber Health or Lyft Health or whatever, when what they really just need is a ride to the hospital. But what I wanted to make sure was happening here was in a performance audit that was conducted of the police department last year, the Department of Audits found that BPD was not recovering the full and actual costs of providing coverage at special events like Orioles and Ravens games. And so I just want to make sure that the fire department is actually looking for every available opportunity to make sure that we're billing the stadium authority for the full costs. I'm sure that when somebody sat down and tried to figure out how much we needed to be charging for medical transport, they brought in how much it costs to maintain the vehicles, how much we're charging, how much overhead we're putting out there for the ambulance itself. Mr. Fisher?
I do want to point out about the equipment. We use the FEMA rates for reimbursement on this contract. So, which is acceptable rates for medic units per hour. So, I mean, we don't have any additional cost normally. If there are additional costs, that's when we actually have to transport someone. And that's what Chief Matz was speaking of. This unit only in an extreme emergency would leave the stadium. They're there to help coordinate any type of emergency back and forth, through EMS. So regular EMS comes in at that point and transports the person.
Oh, so the unit that's there doesn't even take someone to the hospital if there is.
Only in an extreme emergency, I think Chief Matt says, and
Cardiac arrest, something really critical, they're gonna jump out. If it's really
Yeah.
severe instance, we're gonna jump out. Just to piggyback on what the comptroller and the mayor were talking about, we are doing a lot of innovative programs, and it's for another time to discuss, but we're doing programs like mobile integrated healthcare, where we actually take the healthcare to the patient on the street, and we take the patient to the right resource. Patients don't always need to go to the emergency department. We're doing a lot of these new programs where we're taking the urgent care centers, like Total Healthcare in West Baltimore. It's a great hub out there. There's also a program we just started this year called ET3, where we're working this year in West Baltimore. Second year is East Baltimore, which is essentially Hopkins. Year 3 is the rest of Baltimore. So more to come on that, but we're actively working on it. But it's slow and steady. You can't make big jumps on that. We're doing little pieces at a time.
And one other thing, I do want to mention, you mentioned the amount of 100,000. Well, that's not just for Camden Yards. That would extend also to M&T Bank Stadium if they needed us. If they have, for instance, a concert, or if the Pope comes again and does another mass, so they can call us in based on this contract. And that's why we structured it that way, to bill us for help with EMS services.
Okay. Mr. President, that's all I have now, although my staff may follow up with Mr. Fisher and the chief on getting some of those specifics, but thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller, and thank you to Mr. Fisher as well as Chief Matz. At this point, are there any additional questions from the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move the approval.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is now approved. Next up, we're going to go to municipal telephone service contract extension. This non-routine agenda item can be found on pages 64 through 65. Item number 5, contract number B50003985, telecommunications improvement and procurement project, municipal telephone exchange. At this time, we're going to go slightly out of order. This is a item that falls under the jurisdiction of the comptroller. Before we go to the Bureau of Procurement, I just wanted to give Comptroller Henry opportunity to speak on behalf of any concerns that he might have prior to Ms. Keisha Brown speaking.
Oh, just the opposite, sir. I was hoping that we would just treat this as a contract coming from any agency, so I'm happy to
No,
let.
it's the same way, but it probably makes more sense for you to just bring in any of your issues now and she can address it during her time. I'm trying to drive for efficiency here.
Okay, well, then the first question I would have would actually be, see, this feels weird to ask the questions before.
All right, okay, Mr. Comptroller, you don't want to stay inside of our box, we'll stay inside of our box.
I'll stay inside our box, sir.
Ms. Keisha Brown from Procurement, can you speak?
Sure.
And Mr. Comptroller Henry will ask you questions. Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Mayor Scott, President Mosby, Comptroller Henry, and other members of the board. The Bureau of Procurement is requesting approval of a Fourth Amendment and extension of contract B503985 for telecommunication improvement and procurement project known as TIP. This is under the agency of the Municipal Telephone Exchange. The Bureau of Procurement is requesting approval of action to opt out of a renewal term at the city's sole discretion to execute an extension period from March 30th, 2021 through March 30th, 2021, as we have a pending bid. We had an opportunity to review the pricing on the contract during the renewal period, and with market surveillance and our consulting with the subject matter experts in Municipal Telephone Exchange, we currently have an advertisement on out for bid to obtain better pricing, and that bid will be opened on May 19th, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. At this time, I'll entertain any questions from the board. Are there any questions from the board? I see the hand of Mr. Comptroller Henry. Mr. Comptroller Henry, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, see, this is exactly why I wanted her to go first, because one of the questions I was going to ask is the status of the new solicitation, and she already told us. So that's great. One of the reason that I had a concern with this was the MBE-WBE compliance. In a review conducted last September, the MBU office found that the prime contractor was in compliance, even though the MBE subcontractor had only been assigned work amounting to 3.41% towards a 6% goal. And the WBE sub had only been assigned 1.1% towards a 2% goal. I don't know if this is something that would be best asked of Ms. Miller, Chief Miller in the MBU office, but my first issue was these aren't great percentages of the attainment, and so I wanted to know why that was considered to be compliant.
Good morning, Council President Mosby, Mayor Scott, Comptroller Henry, and members of the board. With regard to the telecommunications contract, the reason we deemed this compliant by way of good faith effort, we did an evaluation in 2019 as well as the one we just did last year in 2020. And when we evaluated all of the purchases that were made against the purchase order, they were all for software, which is actually a manufactured good through Mitel. And the MBE and WBEs that were selected for this contract are more so available to provide professional services, such as things like technical support, customer service, troubleshooting, and things of that nature. But unfortunately, the city did not have any need for professional services at the time when the reviews were done by MBU. And so we didn't see it to be fair to penalize them because the purchases that were made by the city were strictly for the software and the commodity portion of this contract. But we did have proof that they did show and demonstrate use of their subcontractors whenever the opportunity was presented for services to be rendered. So we did want to give them credit for that as well.
Okay, so now that we know that this is what ends up happening, if we're doing a new solicitation for a new contract, have we already put different requirements in to ensure that there are MBWB opportunities if there is no need for additional service, or are we adjusting the goals to reflect that? Are we doing anything different because we've seen that we can't necessarily meet the goals with any type of certainty given the nature of how the work is currently being divided in this contract?
I would like to defer to Ms. Brown because I believe that would have to do more so with the new solicitation that's out. So Ms. Brown, and I want to pass on to me if you had any details about the goals, I could speak on that as well.
Right, so the Bureau of Procurement, thank you, Chief Miller, requested a waiver based on the scope. The initial, project may have had opportunities for that consulting, but as we move further along and the, project is becoming more cohesive, we recognize that the, product that we would be purchasing may not very well, be fit to have any MBE or WBE based on our database. So we requested a waiver of the MBU office, and that waiver was approved with the new advertisement that is currently opening on May 19th.
Because it's all it really is about is the software purchase.
Yes, sir.
And if we don't need the support services, there's no opportunity to reach out to the MBE or the WBE subs. Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for us to proceed.
I move approval.
Second.
It's been approved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving this item on the non-routine agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. Next up is our final item for today on the non-routine agenda. It can be found on pages 69 through 70, items 2 and 3, recommendations for contract awards and rejections. SC 954, primary settling tanks, numbers 3 and 4, rehabilitation at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant. The recommendation is to award the contract in the amount of $26,423,800 to Alman Schutte Construction LLC. There's also a related transfer of funds. A protest has been received on this item from Mr. Jeremy Schultz of Miles and Stockbridge on behalf of the American Contracting and Environmental Services Incorporated. Responses to that protest have been received by Mr. Robert DeShiel on behalf of Alman Schutte and from Mr. Franklin Lee on behalf of Highmark. We will hear from DPW first, then from the makers of the protest, then from the respondents. We'll begin with DPW with Mr. Kibiti. The floor is yours, Mr. Kibiti.
Good morning, and thank you, Council President Mosby, Mayor.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kibiti, your volume is a little low. Can you speak up a little bit? Or maybe turn the volume up? Try again now.
Can you hear me now?
It's still a little faint. We don't hear that strong voice we normally hear on Wednesday mornings from you. It may be a shortening the headset. Try again.
Hello, can you hear me?
It's
If you could give me a moment to switch microphones, just give me just a quick second.
okay. Yes,
Mr. President,
yes, Director.
I could jump into this.
Okay.
If you'd like me to.
Sure.
So this contract is for rehabilitation of settling tanks at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's in the amount of $26.4 million. There were, I believe, multiple bids that were received. Recommended winner is the lowest responsive and responsible bid. It is not the lowest of all of the bids. The lowest bidder was not deemed compliant with MBU requirements. So they were not recommended for award. Alman Schutte is the lowest bid in that regard. And I believe I can defer to, and we were going to defer to Miss Chief Miller, because I believe the matter of the protest dealt with compliance with the MBU goals, as well as the certification of a particular minority business firm.
Good morning, Council President, Mayor Scott, Comptroller Henry, and members of the board. As it relates to the SC 954, when we received the participation reviews related to this contract, the vendor was deemed compliant at the time that we conducted the review. We did not cite any reasons why they were not responsive to the bid and could not be recommended for award. it was later brought to our attention by the members of ACES that one of the proposed MBE firms was not a valid MBE with our program. And there were questions raised as it pertained to the validity of the company actually being within our market area. And we received that notification, I believe it was in January or early February of this year. And of course, upon receipt of that, we did our due diligence to conduct our investigation, which is standard procedure for us when we receive notifications of that kind. And the investigation is still ongoing as it relates to our efforts.
So at this point, Chief Miller, I know it's ongoing. Is there a recommendation on where we stand today?
A recommendation as it relates to MBU's process or?
Yes, MBU's position, yes.
No, because based on the information that we received from the Schultz Law Firm, we are open to new information. And so we are taking into consideration the information that was provided so that we can continue our efforts.
Understood. Now, Chief Miller, last question. How long do you expect like that process to play out from your past experience regarding the information that they provided, your background investigation? You know, how long does that typically take?
It depends. To be totally honest and transparent, we have one claims investigator with our office who does pretty much all of the investigations within our department. And so given the extensive data that we received along with the data that we research on our own, it could take maybe a month, 2 months, but I don't want that to be misquoted or.
Understood. So it's really all about like how you get to prioritize. Because
Yes.
Are you saying you only have one investigator that goes after and looks at these claims?
Yes, at this.
Has that always been the case, or is that?
No, in the past, no. MBU has had previous staff or claims investigators, but due to staff changes, that has changed.
Okay. All right. So at this point, DPW, either Director Garbark or Mr. Kavidi, do you have anything to add? Yes, Director Garbark, I see your hand.
Just want to make sure, Ms. Miller, you said that the investigation is still ongoing. That is just because you're open to more information, but everything that you have researched and found has kept your recommendation that they are a valid firm intact, and you have said that the contract can move forward. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
At this point, if DPW or the administration does not have any additional points to add, I'm going to jump to the protest respondents, Mr. Schultz or Mr. Gooden, sorry, to speak on behalf of the protests. Mr. Schultz or Mr. Gooden, the floor is yours.
Good morning, clerk and honorable members of the Board of Estimates. Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Hear you loud and clear.
So my name is Jeremy Schultes from Miles and Stockbridge, and I'm here this morning representing American Construction and Environmental Services, Inc., that I'll refer to most likely as ACES as we go on this morning. And with me is Joe Godin, Executive Vice President for ACES. We have four principal points, maybe five principal points of protest, but the last three are really sort of associated with each other. The first point is that Highmark Construction Group, which is the identified MBE subcontractor for approximately 18.6% of Ullman Schute's 26% MBE goal, does not have a local operating office in the Baltimore City market area. Second point of protest is that Highmark does not provide a commercially useful function. In other words, Ullman is capable of performing all of the work on this contract, and in fact, work subcontracted to Highmark is work that will flow through Highmark as really an extra participant because it doesn't have the skill and expertise and management capability to handle this work, and will in fact, we believe, subcontract even further down the pipeline. And those subcontracts, those second tier subcontracts, may not even be to MBE firms. And then the last sort of grouping is a concern about Highmark's ownership, Highmark's control by the 51% minority owners, and affiliation of Highmark with actually two entities. One is High Towers Petroleum, and second is Ullman itself. So before I jump into a little more detail on each of those points, I really think it's useful to just pump the brakes for a moment and think about why this protest is even brought before you, and it's entirely about MBE certification. If we look at sort of the legislative history, if you will, of the MBE program, the bottom line is the mayor and city council from years past identified that there's an underutilization of minority-owned businesses in the Maryland City market area. And the underutilization in Baltimore procurement is the problem. And the city and the mayor have conducted multiple hearings through the years. They conducted in 2000 a disparity study, in 2007 another disparity study, in 2014 yet another disparity study. And what all of this gets us to from even before 2000 was passing of Article 5, Subtitle 28 of the Baltimore City Code, which says we need to have an MBE program. And this is what the MBE program is going to look like. And we need to have an office that's going to be in charge of it. And that's MBU, that's Ms. Miller and her team now. And by the way, we need regulations to implement this code, which is largely Section 3 of the procurement regulations that we're all following. And as a part of that, there are going to be certification requirements, which are captured in the code and in Section 3. And those aren't negotiable provisions. We're going to set percentages to make sure we bring MBE and WBE, but that's not an issue before us today, MBE firms into the fold to make sure they have the opportunity to compete and the opportunity to be subcontractors. And obviously the flow down from there also is that residents of the Baltimore City area are employed, they have good jobs, tradesmen and craftsmen, and opportunities to, of course, better their lives. So we're starting with a framework of MBE, minority business enterprises, are important. In this particular procurement, there was a 26% MBE established requirement. ACES met that requirement. Ullman purports to have met that requirement. The problem with, and I understand Ullman largely relies upon the certification from MBU, that Highmark is all squared away and meeting all the requirements, and that Ullman relies upon the subcontractor who signs a affidavit, signs attachment B and says, look, we meet all of these requirements. All right, so that gets us to protest point 1, which is Highmark does not have an operating office from which day-to-day management is conducted in the Baltimore City market area. And I understand from Ms. Miller that on November 13th, 2020, which was when MBU's review was done, all looked in order and they were certified. We did raise through our protest, and in fact, we submitted a MPIA request in December of 2020 to inquire about the application and the certification documents that MBU has for Highmark. And then in January, we submitted our protest. We raised the matter to Ms. Miller and her team concerning Highmark not meeting all the different MBE points. In fact, control issues, ownership issues, marketplace issues, and affiliation issues, everything that's before you today. In her investigation, as she said, started. So here's what we found. Here's what ACES found in the course of its evaluation. And that's that the regulations require that the location for the MBE, here Highmark, must be where individuals who regularly manage the firm's day-to-day operations are located, where clients are met, and where business records are kept. And that location cannot be an operating office, cannot be, which is a term in the regulation, an operating office. If it's only a virtual office, a home office of a applicant's employee, or it's just, there's a service agreement for phone service. ACES found a number of things. Highmark Construction Group is actually an Ohio company, and their headquarters is in Middletown, Ohio. And in fact, if you go to their website right now, their website, this instant, is open on my computer. Their website says that their Maryland location is at 111 South Calvert Street, Suite 2700, number 2749. Now that's Harbor Place Office Tower, and they are not there, but that's where they advertise their Maryland location is at. Now, where did they tell MBU their Baltimore City market area operating office is? They said 113 Monument Street. And we did receive from MBU in our MPIA request, and also from Highmark, a copy of a November 1st, 2018 lease that shows that Highmark leases from Bith Group Technology, and that the property, we found this on our own, but the property is owned by Wallace Legacy. But that is the only evidence that Highmark actually maintains an operating office at 113 Monument Street. If you go to 113 Monument Street, which we have, there's no signage that indicates Highmark is there. If you go to Highmark's own website, they don't advertise that they're located at that place. If you go there this morning, and I understand we are in a pandemic and not everyone will necessarily be there, or perhaps no one will be there. In fact, we're operating remotely and virtually right now. No signage, no truck or car with a marking on it, no indication at all that anyone is there. Day-to-day operations must be managed by someone at that location, period. Now, understanding from March of 2020 to present, we're under very unique circumstances with COVID. But Quincy Hightower is identified as the president and CEO of Highmark. And Quincy Hightower lives in Middletown, Ohio. Quincy Hightower works from the headquarters in Middletown, Ohio. There's no indication or evidence at all, nor does Highmark even say in its responsive pleading that Quincy Hightower or anyone else actually comes to 113 Monument to conduct day-to-day operations. So if in fact there are any day-to-day operations for Highmark, they're conducted from Middletown, Ohio. They quite simply do not meet a very straightforward requirement that is in Baltimore City Code, and that's in the procurement regulations. So to certify them as an MBE and for the BOE to proceed with approving this contract, especially when MBU actually has an ongoing investigation, is frankly, it's a violation of law, statute in Baltimore City, and it's a breach of the regulations and rules. I would suggest to the board that questions be posed to MBU and to Highmark, like, what is Highmark's actual address in Baltimore City? Is it 111 or is it 113 Monument? If it's 113 Monument Street, then why does Highmark advertise 111 South Calvert as its location? And there's nobody there. And you can see attachments in our protest that show they're not listed on the marquee, and there's no record of them having an office there, which, by the way, is a WeWork office share space. Interestingly enough, there is a company that lists 113 Monument as their office location, and that's Hightowers Petroleum Company. Hightower Petroleum Company is the company that is, we believe, affiliated with, which is its own problem, affiliated with Highmark. A gentleman named Stephen Hightower, who has been very successful in his own right and with his team, has grown Hightowers Petroleum into a multi-$100 million a year petroleum enterprise in Middletown, Ohio. They list 113 Monument on their website right now today on my computer as their location. Again, to MBU and Highmark, if they're operating there, who is actually operating day-to-day the management of that company at that location for a Baltimore City contract? Is it Quincy Hightower? If it's not Quincy Hightower, who is it? We see in the Highmark's responsive pleading that they recently hired a gentleman named Kevin, I think it's Tome, I may be mispronouncing it, Thome, and that he's going to be the project manager and the project engineer for SC 954 subcontracted work. Well, that gentleman also lives and works in Middletown, Ohio. So he's not here. I would even suggest asking, how many employees does Highmark actually have? And of those employees, how many actually live and work in Baltimore City or in the Baltimore City market area? Because I would suggest to you that, at least based on what we found, that answer is going to be 0 or very close to it. The bottom line on this point is that apart from Highmark's November 1st, 2018 lease, there is no evidence that there are individuals who regularly manage the firm's day-to-day operations from 113 Monument or anywhere in the Baltimore City market area. They are not meeting clients at 113 Monument or anywhere in the Baltimore City market area, and their business records aren't kept here. Now, we haven't gone into Suite 3 at 113 Monument, obviously, so we don't know what records are in there, but based on all other indications, it would seem they don't have an operating office here. This is a critical issue, which is why I started with, why does the MBE program exist and what are the code and regulatory requirements? The whole point of this program is to raise up MBE companies in the Baltimore City market area. Give those companies an opportunity. Now, that's not always possible, but in this case, Highmark doesn't have that operating office here. ACES and its subcontractors who are MBE certified, absolutely hands down. For example, Spence Trucking would be providing $4.4 million of work. They're a folks from all across the Baltimore area. Point two, Highmark does not provide a commercially useful function. And interestingly, we make a number of allegations in our protest about Zach Lenke, who is a sort of a flip-flop employee between Uleman and Highmark. We also talk about Todd Rittenauer, who currently works for ACES. He provided an affidavit that when he worked for Uleman from about 2006 to 2016 or 2008 to 2016, Uleman was working with Highmark then, and Uleman was providing management, oversight, contract drafting, invoicing services, all of those services and all of those activities that Highmark should have been performing. And Highmark responds, and I understand that that information is stale. Much has changed since 2016 for Highmark. And one of those things that changed that they also noted in their responsive letter is that this Kevin Stone fellow has been hired. He again is a former Uleman employee who went to DC Water, who's now at Highmark. Highmark and Uleman both in Ohio and performing a bunch of work together. But perhaps the best evidence at this point is actually attachment 4 to Highmark's responsive letter that is a chart of current subcontracts. I mean, it really shows great evidence of just how little skill, expertise, and actual responsibility to perform Highmark has. And that Highmark doesn't provide materials and supplies on projects. And that in fact, it looks like Highmark is merely an extra participant. And if you go to section 3.A.5.K of the regulations, it's very clear. A commercially useful function is one where the entity, the enterprise, has the skill and expertise and actual responsibility to perform, manage, and supervise. That's part one. Part two is that they have the ability to determine quality and quantity, ordering of materials. They're able to install, and they're able to pay for the material themselves. And part three of that section says that a business enterprise does not perform a commercially useful function if its role is limited to that of an extra participant in a transaction, contract, or project through which funds are passed in order to obtain the appearance of an MBE. If you look at that chart that was attached as attachment 4 from Highmark, this is what it basically shows you. 5 subcontracts. These are supposed to be the most relevant current sampling of subcontracts. The first thing I would draw to your attention is that the most recent one is 2018. It shows 5 contracts. 1 from 2016, 3 from 2017, 1 from 2018. I draw your attention to subcontract number 1. That contract does not match up. The contract value doesn't even match up with the labor and subcontract amounts listed there. But just assuming that that was a calculation error, essentially what this chart shows is that out of a $6.326 million contract, Highmark further subcontracted almost 97% of the work to another entity. They only self-performed 3.3%. And of that 6.3 million, right, that dollar amount's $210,000. And there's no indication by their own admission that they provided any supplies or any materials for that project. It looks like they're a pass-through. Subcontract 2, again, by their own admission, they subcontracted out 3.1 million of a $3.2 million subcontract. They self-performed only 82,000 out of a $3.2 million contract. So who performed all the rest of that work? And if they're not a pass-through, then why are they subcontracting all of this work to somebody else? And if they were an MBE performing on these subcontracts, did they subcontract to MBEs? Subcontract 3, again, by Highmark's own admission, they only performed 111,000 of labor, no supplies and no materials. Again, subcontract 4, by their own admission, 75,000 of their own labor, no supplies, no materials. Subcontract 5, again, by their own admission, they subcontracted out 1.6 million of a $1.8 million contract value, performing only 185,000 of the work themselves. So, I mean, this should be extremely concerning to MBU and to the Board of Estimates. This isn't ACES going out and finding this information. This is actually the information that Highmark responded with to the board. And again, don't forget that to the extent any of this work is performed by Highmark, Highmark is based out of Middletown, Ohio, when it could be awarding to a responsible and responsive bidder like ACES and using Baltimore City market area subcontractors, helping our economy, helping our businesses raise up through Baltimore City procurement. The bottom line is this: it does not appear, and of course we could be wrong, but it does not appear based on our findings and what Highmark has submitted to the Board of Estimates that Highmark has the skill, expertise, and actual responsibility to perform. If they did, why then are they subcontracting out on their 3 biggest subcontracts in 2017 and 18? 96.7% of the work, 97.5% of the work, and 89.7% of the work on subcontract 5. They do not appear to provide a commercially useful function by their own track record, and I would suggest to you that they will not provide a commercially useful function here. That brings us to the last set of points, which is really, they're all sort of combined, but extremely important. And it's interesting because I spend most of my time before the state or US DOT actually defending companies that submit for MBE certification and are denied certification because of these very same issues. And yet Highmark has been certified twice, again, just as recently as March 2nd, 2020, when they have a whole litany of problems. Here's what the evidence shows in our protest and, importantly, in Highmark's response. Since at least June of 2017, Quincy Hightower has been the president and CEO, and by their own admission, has been in continuous control of management and day-to-day operations of Highmark. Again, from Middletown, Ohio, not here in Baltimore. Based on a June 29th, 2017 document called Share Transfer of Gift, which was attachment 1 to Highmark's letter, Quincy Hightower, who's president and CEO, owns 40%. His cousin, Jason Hightower, owns 20%. His sister, Stephanie Thomas, owns 20%. And his brother, Stephen L. Hightower II, owns 20%. So it looks like, and having looked them all up on LinkedIn and numerous other sites, that they are all minority. So we definitely have a 51% plus minority ownership. Here's the interesting part about that share transfer by gift. Stephen Hightower owned, until 2017, 80% or more of Highmark Construction. Stephen Hightower also owns a multi-$100 million petroleum company based in Middletown, Ohio. He is the president of that organization and sole owner. When he transferred the full 100% over to the four individuals I listed, Quincy, Jason, Stephanie, and Stephen, that was a conditional gift based on repayment of a loan. There's a $1.2 million loan that has to be paid back from Highmark to who? Hightowers Petroleum. Hightowers Petroleum had to sign off on that gift. And here is what the document says in paragraph 2C. The corporation, being Highmark, is indebted to HPC, which is Hightowers Petroleum, in the original principal amount of 1.2 million pursuant to certain promissory notes that have subsequently been amended. Then in section 2D, it says, as condition of this gift and to induce HPC, Hightowers Petroleum, to agree to a certain third restated promissory note and to otherwise consent to the change in ownership of the corporation, the recipients, the four new owners, shall each execute a non-recourse third-party pledge agreement to secure the third restated promissory note with the security interests in each recipient shares in the corporation. And then further down in section 4, it says, quote, in consideration of and completely conditioned on compliance by all the recipients with section 2D of this gift to the satisfaction of HPC in the sole and absolute discretion of HPC, HPC consents to the transaction contemplated by the gift. Who is gifting? Stephen Hightower. Who has to sign off on this also? HPC. And who signs off for HPC? Stephen Hightower. When the loan is paid back, who is it paid back to? Hightower Petroleum. If Hightower Petroleum doesn't get paid back or calls that loan, that's a problem for Highmark. Everything ties back to Stephen Hightower, who owns Hightowers Petroleum back in Middletown, Ohio. Here's another interesting point concerning control. Stephen Hightower is the CEO, as I mentioned, of Hightower Petroleum. Jason Hightower, 20% owner. What is his day job? He is the Chief Information Officer from 2010 to present of Hightowers Petroleum. Stephanie Thomas, 20% owner. What is her day job? She's Contracts Administrator for Hightower Petroleum. Stephen L. Hightower II, 20% owner. What is his day job? He's Chief Operating Officer of Hightower Petroleum from May 2009 to present. All of this is publicly available on LinkedIn sites and other places. Also, if you go check today, as of, this is as of December 1st, 2020, who is still the registered agent for Highmark? Stephen Hightower. I mean, all roads go back to Stephen Hightower. All money for Highmark, at least 1.2 million of it in loans, ties back to Stephen Hightower and Hightowers Petroleum. Who is the dad and uncle of all the owners who, if you think he doesn't have influence over these four individuals, I would suggest that might be a slight step away from reality. Again, Stephen Hightower, Hightower Petroleum. So I would suggest to MBU and to the Board of Estimates that there is potentially an ownership problem that was attempted to be cured for MBE purposes in 2007 and wasn't cured in the proper way. There's a control issue because everything still ties back to Stephen Hightower. And even if you were to find that there isn't an ownership or control problem here, there's an affiliation problem. And that affiliation problem exists on two levels. Number one, Hightower Petroleum Company and Highmark are intertwined through loans that are due. That's a problem. That's a problem by our own regulations, and that's a problem by our regulations here for Baltimore City are largely tied back to SBA and CFR 121 provisions concerning affiliation. So they're contractually tied together. They're also co-located. They operate from the same place in Middletown, Ohio. And that address is listed on Highmark's no change affidavit they submitted on March 2nd, 2020. They apparently, if in fact Highmark operates from the Baltimore City market area, they both operate from the same location at 113 Monument. So that creates a problem for Highmark in terms of affiliation, because you have a sharing of resources, space, and that type of thing, whereby Highmark is reliant on Hightower Petroleum. Concerning Uleman, I would suggest to Embu and the board that there is a very strong indication that the two companies are intertwined with each other. And here's the problem. In any other situation, that would be absolutely okay. In fact, it might even be encouraged, right? It gives Highmark an opportunity to learn from Uleman, learn from their managers, learn from their tradespeople, and grow up a better and stronger organization. That is not the case here for an MBE. The appearance is that Uleman, through fellows like Zach Lanke, referenced in our protest, Kevin Thome, referenced in Highmark's letter, and potentially others, are flip-flopping back and forth between Uleman and Highmark. That Uleman provides the expertise and the knowledge and the management and the contract management and even co-signing checks with Highmark. That indicates a concern by Uleman that Highmark may not, in fact, pay its subcontractors. And we know that's a problem because they subcontract practically everything because they're a pass-through. So, ladies and gentlemen, ACES is not here today to throw Highmark under the bus or to throw Uleman under the bus, okay? ACES is here to say Baltimore City has code provisions addressing the MBE program. Baltimore City has procurement regulations concerning MBEs and how they're supposed to operate. And Highmark does not meet the code or regulatory provisions. Therefore, Highmark should not be a certified MBE in Baltimore City. That means Uleman does not have an 18.6% subcontractor who's MBE certified. That means Uleman is not a responsive bidder. Award should go to the next lowest bid or responsive and responsible bidder, that being American Contracting.
Thank you, Mr. Skoltes.
Our request.
Got you. Thank you, Mr. Skoltes. I think you provided a tremendous amount of information. Just real quick, from an MBE, WBE percentage perspective, where was your bid at? I know you talked about the $4 million of hauling to a Baltimore City-based company. I think your total bid was like $26 million. What was the percentage on yours? I know 18.6 is where Uleman is at. What's yours?
And I'm going to defer over to Joe Godin. He's in a much better.
All right, Joe, before we throw everything off, just real quick, do you have that number for us? If not, could you guys get it?
Yes, I have the number right here. We met the goal requirement. Just adding it up here. I think the goal requirement was 26% and we were at 26.2%.
Oh, you did meet the 26% goal. Okay. All right, I think I saw the hand of the mayor, so from a deference perspective, before we move on, I was gonna go to the Embu office, but we'll allow the mayor to speak at this point. So, Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, everyone, and Mr. Schultz and everyone for being here. Mr. President and members of the board, discussing, further discussion of this item, with Embu and DPW is needed. I want to make a motion that we defer this item for 2 weeks. That's my motion to make. I want to have further discussion with both the department and Embu around this item.
If I could vote twice, I would. So I think we're gonna defer this item and move on. We kind of done this in the past. And since so much has been put out on the public record, Mr. Mayor, regarding the position of the respondent associated with the protests, you know, I will just briefly call up Mr. DeShiel to just counter anything that has been said today. You know, again, this is a very open and transparent process. Folks have heard a lot from one side. I think it's only fair, even though the board will decide to defer, to kind of also hear any counter to ensure that we put that in the atmosphere and everyone has an equal chance to kind of advocate for their own perspective. So I think it makes sense for the administration, DPW, Embu. Folks can go back and kind of, you know, figure it out, but at least for the awardee, the Oleman Company, I would like to provide Mr. DeShiel an opportunity to kind of counter any points that have been raised this morning. Mr. DeShiel, I yield the floor to you. Mr. DeShiel, you are on mute. We see your lips moving, but we cannot hear you. There we go.
Some people say that's the best way to hear me. But, good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, other members of the board. Let me say first that every bidder, not just Alderman Shorty, but every bidder has an absolute right to rely upon the certification of the Embu office. And if one chooses to challenge that certification of any company, there's a way to do that. And but bid protest is not the way, because it does not provide, there's no mechanism to allow for the to reverse the certification that's been in place during the context of a bid protest. It's just not, it's not the forum for it. It's not the appropriate way to do it. And in fact, ACES, if they chose to do that, knowing what the decision was of Embu, they could have appealed that decision through the Embu appeal process. And from what I can understand, that has not occurred. To allow bid protests to be challenged on the basis of a certification reverses everything that's a part of the MBE ordinance. And I appreciate the history of it, but I think I'm kind of familiar with it since I wrote the original ordinance, with Jackie McLean sat in the chair that you now occupy. But the fact is, you cannot allow a challenge to a certification process to take place in the context of a bid protest, because you'll never award contracts that way. You will be sitting here forever. The board, that is, will be sitting here forever hearing protests over certification issues that by statute were designed to be resolved someplace else. Secondly, and I don't speak for Highmark, they got their own counsel, but the allegations that have been asserted by against Alderman Shorty are very few. There's an allegation that there's been some interchange back and forth of employees. That's not true. It's no more true between Highmark and Alderman Shorty than it is for Mr. Rittenhour and ACES. The fact probably is that there are very few people in the industry that over time have acquired skills, but there's no indication that anybody who ever worked for Highmark or Alderman Shorty went back and forth between the two. That's just simply not true. It's just simply not true. With respect to the commercially useful function argument, that it can't be commercially useful because Alderman Shorty could do all of the work with his own forces, well, you might as well get rid of the MBE program if that's going to be the standard for what constitutes commercial usefulness. In fact, I remember hearing that argument many, many years ago from prime contractors because they bemoaned the fact that they're in fact giving away work that they could profit on. But that's the whole point of the program. It's not, so the issue is the work that's identified for the MBE actual work that needs to be performed in the course of performing the contract, completing the work under the contract? And we haven't heard anything from ACS that indicates that the work allocated for Highmark is not work that's required to be performed. Now they assert that Highmark doesn't have the qualifications and all of that. I'll leave that to Highmark's attorney. But the point that needs to be made here is that if a bidder, including ACS, I mean, anybody can hire a bunch of investigators or peruse the public documents and come up with all sorts of things to present before the board. But if we ever adopt the policy that bidders cannot rely upon the certification when the bid document themselves tells them to go to the MBE directory and from that directory to select firms that are certified to do certain things, if bidders can't rely upon that, then the whole program falls. We're going down a very dangerous path. We're allowing disgruntled bidders to come in. And besides that, MBU has already investigated this. This is, although we didn't get the protest until a few days ago or a week ago, apparently this thing was filed back in January. So there's been more than ample opportunity for everybody, including ACS, if it didn't like MBU's decision, to pursue that through the certification appeal process, which they have not done. Rather, they throw all of this, everything up against the wall and hope that something sticks. This is a very dangerous path to follow, and I urge the board to allow Alderman Shorty to do the same thing that every other bidder has done from the time the ordinance was first adopted, which is to rely upon the certification of the MBU office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shield. We appreciate your perspective. At this point, the only other party I think that's really important to hear from is Highmark. Is anyone on from Highmark at this point? I think Mr. Franklin, are you on for Highmark?
Yes, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President, Mr.
Yes,
Mayor.
So there's been a lot of information that's been put out there from a Highmark perspective. Again, just like I provided Alderman Schulte, the ability to kind of clear the air and provide their perspective. As you know, that this item will be deferred. At this point, we'll yield the floor to you to kind of counter or provide any additional information around the allegations of being a pass-through, around the allegations of not being Baltimore City based, around the allegations of not hiring Baltimore City residents, around the allegations of being controlled and operated out of Ohio.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. And let me just say, well, we did just get this bid protest about a week ago, and I've been working feverishly with the client to try to respond to all the specious allegations that have been put out there, some of which have been repeated today and some new ones that have come up today. And I want to try to address some of them. Most of the detail is in the written submission that we've given you. But to get to a couple of the main issues that have been raised here this morning, Highmark is a company that's been around for a long time, and it is a family-run business. At this stage, in the company's history, however, Quincy Hightower is the one that's really president CEO. He's the one that's responsible for running the day-to-day operations of that company. But this family goes back 3 generations in business, and one of the original African-American entrepreneurs in Ohio. I've known them for quite some number of years. And Steve started out with Highmark, but he's now focused primarily on the Highmark Petroleum Company. 2 entirely different companies, entirely different industries. ACS has basically misconstrued the affiliation rule entirely. The affiliation rule was established to make sure that no company in a particular industry had unfair advantage because they had common ownership and were controlled perhaps by another company in the same industry. And if you look at the affiliation rule in the Baltimore City Code, that's really what it's talking about, having a bidder actually being affiliated with a subcontractor in that manner. We don't have a situation here, and it's quite clear that American Petroleum has no Hightower Petroleum has no ownership whatsoever in Highmark at this point. The three other family members that do have some ownership in Highmark Construction are not active in its day-to-day operations. They're working for the petroleum company, and that's perfectly legitimate and perfectly fine. So you really got to look at the capabilities of Quincy Tower to run and operate the company. As we indicated in our submission, Mr. Hightower, Quincy Hightower, is a graduate of the Dartmouth Business School's training program for diverse entrepreneurs. He graduated in 2012. He came up in the construction business working as a laborer, and then working his way up to being a safety officer in the company and handling other functions. But he's been trained to run the company, and since 2017, he's been the one handling the situation. One thing about the capabilities of the company, if you go back to that Exhibit 4 that's really been misinterpreted entirely here, I asked Quincy Hightower to give me a list of those projects that they worked on with a similar scopes of work to this one, at least in the same wastewater treatment plant vein, and to reflect the subcontracts that Highmark has actually performed. So those scopes of work that you see on Exhibit 4 are those scopes of work that Highmark has been responsible for performing since 2017, involving a number of wastewater treatment plants. So they're familiar with this work. There's been another specious allegation that was raised about joint checks. Since Quincy Hightower has taken over the company, we see that they have the ability to certainly handle their own payment, and they don't do joint checks anymore. He's building the capacity of the company and will do so, continue to do so through this contract if it's awarded, and has already started to identify ways to staff the company up by going to the National Society of Black Engineers. He's going to be going to Howard University Engineering School, Morgan State University Engineering School, and
Add Tuskegee to that list if you could tell him that.
Yes, we'll certainly take that into consideration. One other thing I think is important to point out here. We have two parties involved in this bid protest. In terms of intent or trying to predict the intent, if you want to get into that, as to who is going to be looking to use local firms and local employees and diverse employees, let's look at the legal teams representing these two parties to this bid protest. Take that into consideration as well. Some people talk the talk and other people walk the walk, and I think our client is in the latter category. In terms of this local office business, a very bizarre argument, and ACES is still apparently trying to lean on this, that there's not a legitimate local office here. Well, I personally haven't been in my office but 3 times in the last year and a half. And if you go to my office right now, you won't find me there. So they hire some private investigator to go around, take pictures of buildings in the middle of a pandemic where there's no human beings to be found, and as if that's indicative of anything, appropriate of anything of value, and it's not. Indeed, if you look at the local office provision in the city code, it specifically allows for exigent circumstances like this in determining whether the type of office is being used is appropriate. It would not be prudent, actually, to have people in that office in the middle of a pandemic. You also don't want to bring people in harm's way unnecessarily. So when there's work here to be performed, you better believe there's going to be people in that office, and more importantly, people out in the field doing the work. And as for this commercially useful function matter, again, Ullman Schulte and also Highmark had discussions early on, looking at the scopes of work where Highmark had been certified as being capable of performing them, and they had experience. And we provided some additional evidence of some of that experience here. This Kevin Tome that has been hired by Highmark now to serve as his project manager for this project, should it be awarded to them? They didn't hire him from Ullman Schulte. He worked a couple of years at DC Water, got some more experience there, and they've hired him from there back in September, long before this bid protest was even filed. So we quite frankly take a lot of this, take great offense at a lot of these accusations that are being made, because they're just speculations, pure speculation, to try to project and say, well, we believe that this particular certified MBE that's been certified since, well, I think they've been in Baltimore since 2009, but they've been certified or recertified. We got notice that they got recertified as of April 10th of this year for another 2 years, that somehow they're going to do something illegal in the future. And that's not, you can't award contracts based on some speculation about what may or may not happen in the future. You've got to look at whether they're qualified today, and they are qualified today to be awarded this subcontract for this particular project. And finally, I just want to say that there's really a great opportunity here for Highmark to actually go to other certified firms in the area that may not be busy, and to find ways to collaborate with them if necessary. But their first priority is going to be to try to staff up for this project once it's awarded. And that's in the best interest of the city. Should they keep a bunch of people on staff doing nothing while they don't have work? Well, if they were to do that, they would be poor business people. And indeed, they would end up having to cost the city more money to carry the overhead. And one other thing I wanted to point out, their office that they are in fact leasing from BITH Technology, another certified MBE, by the way, and Bob Wallace's firm. That office is going to be the main reason, or I'm sorry, that office is basically the office out of which they're operating. If there's something on the website to the contrary, they just haven't updated it, and I'm not sure why, but we can find that out. That's easily taken care of. But the fact that they're subcontracting or subleasing office space from another MBE, I think, is also indicative of the fact that they're no front, they're no fraud, they're a legitimate business, and they care about economic inclusion and diversity. I think I'll leave it at that. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy.
The only other thing I'm going to ask, and we've already determined we're going to defer this item again. Just wanted to make sure we put everything on the table from all parties and all perspectives. The only one thing that you didn't really get a chance to address, Mr. Lee, and wondering if you could provide any information to the general public, is the allegations of being a pass-through and past performance. I think that there's been 2 exhibits that were raised where the award amount, more than 90% went to other entities, which would be indicative of someone that is just kind of operating a pass-through. Is there anything that you would like to put on the record today to kind of speak on behalf of?
I don't know what you're referring to. Again, the chart that as exhibit or attachment 4 to our submission was representative of the work that Highmark performed. I don't see any other subcontractors listed on there, and I'm not sure where that came from. But in certain contracts, depending upon what the scope of work is, if you're a construction manager, for example, or doing construction management, you're not performing much of the work. You're handling the management part of it. So it's clear that in the negotiations between Ullman Schulte and Highmark, it's quite clear that they've been talking about furnishing and installing a variety of different materials. Doing the cleaning of the tanks, they've been talking about demolition. They've been talking about, doing active work on those projects. If the city is genuinely concerned that, well, maybe they're not telling the truth about what they're going to do. I mean, everything that I've seen would reflect that that's what their intentions are, that Highmark would actually be performing this work. But there's a mechanism built into your program to make sure that every prime contractor is complying with the terms and the scopes of their subcontracts so that there are no pass-throughs. My client has told me they would welcome the oversight of the city if you have any doubts about who's actually doing the work. They've committed to me, they've committed to Ullman Schulte that they will be performing the work that they commit to perform. And they've developed a staffing plan to make sure that they have the horses to get that work done. And they're going to be going to minority institutions, minority businesses, and residents to fill those positions as they come available. But you've got a compliance operation with MBU that is supposed to be making sure that everyone that says they're doing the work is actually doing it. And we welcome that oversight.
Understood. Well, we're not going to do any rebuttal or back and forth. Mr. Schultes, I provided you with a tremendous amount of time. Again, wanted to make sure that there was at least a counter to all that has been put in the air. I think the mayor has committed to taking a step back, working with DPW as well as the MBU office to do a full evaluation. I mean, this sits at the core of what this board has been communicating for the past, since we took over. We know a lot has been done from past years that, we're working to correct. We understand that institutionalized racism has been built into contracting here in the city of Baltimore. We know that structurally there's been significant problems as it relates to the makeup of the way contracts have been handed out here in the city of Baltimore. I don't know if there's been three other combination of partners in progress in these seats to really push for minority local owned businesses to have access to these contracts that we have not historically seen to the tune in which we should see them. And that's why we provided so much time today to kind of go over and discuss this particular issue. Again, thank you to the leadership of the mayor for saying, hey, let's defer this item. Let's take a step back. We know that there is an investigation that's currently going on from an MBU perspective. I do think it makes sense for us to provide opportunity and space and time for that to be completed. At this point, we're going to move on. Comptroller Henry, do you have a question or do you have a comment?
Well, I have first a comment that the mayor moved to defer it, but we never actually held a vote.
We don't have to vote on that. Do you have something specific to this topic, Mr. Comptroller?
No, in that case, I'm happy to move on because I did have something I wanted to say after this item was concluded.
Yes, sir. So we're going to defer this item. We're going to move on. At this point, Mr. Comptroller, do you have something before we close out and adjourn?
I do. Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, since taking office last December, we have focused relentlessly on holding agencies and contractors accountable for meeting the minority business participation goals established in city contracts. Just as the council president has made a point of saying, I know that all of you share this concern for meaningful enforcement of MBE and WBE compliance. Our authority to approve contract awards, extensions, and increases in value affords us an opportunity to build up and strengthen minority participation in our local economy. As you've all seen, we regularly question agencies at these Wednesday meetings about what they are doing to improve MBE, WBE compliance on their contracts. So today I wanted to give a shout out to some of our agencies who are doing the right thing and are meeting or exceeding MBE, WBE goals. On page 8 of this week's agenda, for example, the Department of Transportation reports that they are exceeding the DPE goals on the contract for reconstruction of the Annapolis Road interchange at Russell Street by more than 12%. Also on page 33, the Department of General Services has assigned a task with 83.04% WBE participation on their contract for fire alarm replacement inspection services. This task will help boost MBE WBE attainment on that contract to 37.43%, exceeding the goal of 36% with 2 years remaining on a 4-year contract. DOT deserves another shout out for its compliance on the in-call design consultant services contract on page 37. DB participation is expected to reach 30% by the end of the contract term, beating the 26% goal. And last but not least, I'd like to recognize the Department of Public Works, which reported to my office that their contracts on pages 54 through 56 will exceed their cumulative MBE WBE goals once ongoing tasks are completed and invoiced. These are all examples of the ways the board's active oversight is making a difference for minority business in the city. So to these agencies, I say, thank you. You're doing well, but you got to keep doing well because we'll be watching and we'll be noting your successes as well as your challenges. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, for giving me this time and for being such steadfast partners in our commitment to a more equitable Baltimore.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, are there any other questions or concerns or comments from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, we will adjourn today. There's no new business at the desk. We will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will reconvene on May the 12th, 2021 at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, please continue to stay safe, follow health protocols, and continue to, as we continue to fight COVID-19 pandemic. Baltimore, we love you.